Good evening. Welcome to February. And A House Full of Stories is excited to bring you a science fiction montage this month. Science fiction has always fascinated me. It's been the works of Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke that I've grown up with. And as I've grown older and older, science fiction has appealed to me more and more and more. And so today, I'm kicking off this festival with The Jigsaw Man by Larry Niven. In AD 1900, Karl Landsteiner classified human blood into four types: A, B, AB, and O, according to incompatibilities. For the first time, it became possible to give a shock patient a transfusion with some hope that it wouldn't kill him. The movement to abolish the death penalty was barely getting started, and already it was doomed. VH83U OAGN7 was his telephone number and his driving license number, and his social security number and the number of his draft card and his medical record. Two of these had been revoked and the other had ceased to matter, except for his medical record. His name was Warren Lewis Knowles. He was going to die. The trial was a day away, but the verdict was no less certain for that. Liu was guilty. If anyone had doubted it, the persecution had ironclad proof. By 18 tomorrow, Liu would be condemned to death. Broxton would appeal the case, on some grounds or the other. The appeal would be denied. His cell was comfortable, small, and padded. This was no slur on the prisoner's sanity, though. Insanity was no longer an excuse for breaking the law. Three of the walls were mere bars. The fourth wall, the outside wall, was cement painted a restful shade of green. But the bars which separated him from the corridor, and from the morose old man on his left, and from the big moronic looking teenager on his right, the bars were 4 inches thick and 8 inches apart, padded in silicon plastic. For the fourth time that day, Liu took a clenched fistful of the plastic and tried to rip it away. It felt like a sponge rubber pillow with a rigid core the thickness of a pencil, and it wouldn't rip. When he let go, it snapped back to a perfect cylinder. "It's not fair," he said. The teenager didn't move. For all of the 10 hours Liu had been in his cell, the kid had been sitting on the edge of his bunk, with his lank black hair falling in his eyes, and his 5 o'clock shadow getting gradually darker. He moved his long, hairy arms only at mealtimes, and the rest of him not at all. The old man looked up at the sound of Liu's voice. He spoke with bitter sarcasm. "You framed?" "No, I. At least you're honest. What did you do?" Liu told him. He couldn't keep the hurt innocence out of his voice. The old man smiled derisively, nodding as if he had expected just that. "Stupidity. Stupidity's always been a capital crime. If you had to get yourself executed, why not for something important? See the kid on the other side of you?" "Sure," Liu said without looking. "He's an organ legger." Liu felt the shock freezing in his face. He braced himself for another look into the next cell, and every nerve in his body jumped. The kid was looking at him. With his dull dark eyes barely visible under his mop of hair, he regarded Liu as a butcher might consider a badly aged side of beef. Liu edged closer to the bars between his cell and the old man's. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "How many did he kill?" "None. He was the snatch man. He'd find someone out alone at night, drug the prospect, and take him home to the dock that ran the ring. It was the dock that did the killing. If Burney brought home a dead prospect, the dock would have skinned him down." The old man sat with Liu almost directly behind him. He had twisted himself around to talk to Liu, but now he seemed to be losing interest. His hands, hidden from view by his bony back, were in constant nervous motion. How many did he snatch? Four. Then he got caught. He's not very bright, Bernie. What did you do to get put here? The old man didn't answer. He ignored Liu completely, his shoulders twitching as he moved his hands. Liu shrugged and dropped back on his bunk. It was 19 o'clock of a Thursday night. The ring had included three snatchmen. Bernie had not yet been tried. Another was dead. He had escaped over the edge of a bed walk when he felt the mercy bullet enter his arm. The third was being wheeled into the hospital next door to the courthouse. Officially, he was still alive. He had been sentenced. His appeal had been denied, but he was still alive as they moved him, drugged, into the operating room. The interns lifted him from the table and inserted a mouthpiece so he could breathe when they dropped him into freezing liquid. They lowered him without a splash, and as his body temperature went down, they dribbled something else into his veins. About half a pint of it. His temperature dropped towards freezing. His heartbeats were further and further apart. Finally, his heart stopped, but it could have been started again. Men had been reprieved at this point. Officially, the organ legger was still alive. The doctor was a line of machines with the conveyor belts running through them. When the organ legger's body temperature reached a certain point, the belt started. The first machine made a series of incisions in his chest. Skillfully and mechanically, the doctor performed a cardiectomy. The organ legger was officially dead. His heart went into storage immediately. His skin followed, most of it in one piece, all of it still living. The doctor took him apart with exquisite care, like disassembling a flexible, fragile, tremendously complex jigsaw puzzle. The brain was flash burned and the ashes saved for urn burial, but all the rest of the body, in slabs and small blobs and parchment thin layers and layers of tubing, went into the hospital's organ banks. Any of these units could be packed in a travel case at a moment's notice and flown to anywhere in the world in not much more than an hour. If the odds broke right, if the right people came down with the right diseases at the right time, the organ legger might save more lives than he had taken. Which was the whole point. Lying on his back, staring up at the ceiling television set, Liu suddenly began to shiver. He had not the energy to put the sound plug into his ear, and the silent motion of the cartoon figures had suddenly become horrid. He turned the set off, and that didn't help either. Bit by bit, they would take him apart and store him away. He'd never seen an organ storage bank, but his uncle had owned a butcher shop. "Hey!" he yelled. The kid's eyes came up, the only living part of him. The old man twisted around to look over his shoulder. At the end of the hall, the guard looked up once, then went back to reading. The fear was in Liu's belly. It pounded in his throat. "How can you stand it?" The kid's eyes dropped to the floor. The old man said, "Stand what?" "Don't you know what they're going to do to us?" "Not to me. They won't take me apart like a hog." Instantly, Liu was at the bars. "Why not?" The old man's voice had become very low. "Because there's a bomb where my right thigh bone used to be. I'm gonna blow myself up. What they find, they'll never use." The hope the old man had raised washed away, leaving bitterness. "Nuts! How could you put a bomb in your leg?" "Take the bone out, bore a hole in it, build the bomb in the hole, get all the organic material out of the bone so it won't rot, put the bone back in. Of course, your red corpuscle count goes around afterwards. What I wanted to ask you, you want to join me?" "Join you?" "Hunch up against the bars. This thing will take care of both of us." Liu found himself backing away. "No, no thanks. Your choice. I never told you what I was here for, did I? I was the doc. Bernie made his snatches for me." Liu had backed up against the opposite set of bars. He felt them touch his shoulders and turned to find the kid looking dully into his eyes from 2 feet away. organ leggers. He was surrounded by professional killers. I know what it's like. They won't do that to me. Well, if you're sure you don't want a clean death, go lie down behind your bunk. It's thick enough. The bunk was a mattress and a set of springs mounted into a cement block, which was an integral part of the cement floor. Liu curled himself into fetal position with his hands over his eyes. He wasn't sure. He was sure he didn't want to die now. Nothing happened. After a while, he opened his eyes, took his hands away, and looked around. The kid was looking at him. For the first time, there was a sour grin plastered on his face. In the corridor, the guard who was always in a chair by the exit was standing outside the bars looking down at him. He seemed concerned. Liu felt the flush riding in his neck and ears. The old man had been playing with him. He moved to get up, and a hammer came down on the world. The guard lay broken against the bars of the cell across the corridor. The lank haired youngster was picking himself up from behind his bunk, shaking his head. Somebody groaned, and the groan rose to a scream. The air was full of cement dust. Liu got up. Blood lay like red oil on every surface that painted the explosion. Try as he might, he didn't try very hard. Liu could find no other trace of the old man, except for the hole in the wall. He must have been standing right there. The hole would be big enough to crawl through if Liu could reach it, but it was the old man's cell. The silicone plastic sheathing on the bars between the cells had been ripped away, leaving only pencil-thin lengths of metal. Liu tried to squeeze through. The bars were humming, vibrating, though there was no sound. As Liu noticed the vibration, he also found that he was becoming sleepy. He jammed his body between the bars, caught in a wall between rising panic and sonic stutters, which may have gone on automatically. The bars wouldn't give, but his body did, and the bars were slippery with. He was through. He poked his head through the hole in the wall and looked down. Way down. Far enough to make him dizzy. The Topeka Country Courthouse was a small skyscraper, and Liu's cell must have been near the top. He looked down a smooth concrete slab, studded with windows, set flush with the sides. There would be no way to reach those windows, no way to open them, no way to break them. The stunner was stabbing his will. He would have been unconscious by now if his head had been in the cell with the rest of him. He had to force himself to turn and look up. He was at the top. The edge of the roof was only a few feet above his eyes. He couldn't reach that far. Not without. He began to crawl out of the hole. Win or lose, they wouldn't get him for the organ banks. The vehicular traffic level would smash every useful part of him. He sat on the lip of the hole, with his legs straight out inside the cell for balance, pushing his chest flat against the wall. When he had his balance, he stretched his arms towards the roof. No good. So, he got one leg under him, keeping the other safely out, and lunged. His hands closed over the edge as he started to fall back. He yelped with surprise, but it was too late. The top of the courthouse was moving. It had dragged him out of the hole before he could let go. He hung on, swinging slowly back and forth over empty space as the motion carried him away. The top of the courthouse was a ped walk. He couldn't climb up, not without purchase for his feet. He didn't have the strength. The ped walk was moving towards another building, about the same height. He could reach it if he only hung on. And the windows in that building were different. They weren't made to open, not in these days of smog and air conditioning. But there were ledges. Perhaps the glass would break. Perhaps it wouldn't. The pull on his arms was agony. It would be so easy to let go. No. He had committed no crime worth dying for. He refused to die. Over the decades of the 20th century, the movement continued to gain momentum. Loosely organized, international in scope, its members had only one goal: to replace execution with imprisonment and rehabilitation in every state and nation they could reach. They argued that killing a man for his crime teaches him nothing, that it serves no deterrent to others who might commit the same crime, that death is irreversible, whereas an innocent man might be released from prison once his innocence is belatedly proven. Killing a man serves no good purpose, they said, unless for society's vengeance. Vengeance, they said, is unworthy of an enlightened society. Perhaps they were right. In 1940, Karl Landsteiner and Alexander S. Weiner made public their report on the RH factor in human blood. By mid century, most convicted killers were getting life imprisonment or less. Many were later returned to society, some rehabilitated, others not. The death penalty had been passed for kidnapping in some states, but it was hard to persuade a jury to enforce it. Similarly, with murder charges, a man wanted for burglary in Canada and murdered in California fought extradition to Canada. He had less chance of being convicted in California. Many states had abolished the death penalty. France had none. Rehabilitation of criminals was a major goal of the science slash art of psychology. But blood banks were worldwide. Already, men and women with kidney diseases had been saved by a kidney transplanted from an identical twin. Not all kidney victims had identical twins. A doctor in Paris used transplants from close relatives, classifying up to 100 points of incompatibility to judge in advance how successful the transplant would be. Eye transplants were common. An eye donor could wait until he died before he saved another man's sight. Human bone could always be transplanted, provided the bone was first cleaned of organic matter. So matters stood at mid century. By 1990, it was possible to store any living organ for any length of time. Transplants had become routine, helped along by the scalpel of infinite thinness, the laser. The dying regularly willed their remains to the organ banks. The mortuary lobbies couldn't stop it. But such gifts from the dead were not always useful. In 1993, Vermont passed the first of the organ bank laws. Vermont had always had the death penalty. Now, a condemned man could know that his death could save lives. It was no longer true that an execution served no good purpose, not in Vermont, nor later in California or Washington, Georgia, Pakistan, England, Switzerland, France, Rhodesia. The pedwalk was moving at 10 miles per hour. Below, unnoticed by pedestrians who had quit work late and night owls who were just beginning their rounds, Lewis Knowles hung from the moving strip and watched the ledge go by beneath his dangling feet. The ledge was no more than 2 feet wide, a good 4 feet beneath his stretching toes. He dropped. As his feet struck, he caught edge of a window casement. Momentum jerked him, but he didn't fall. After a long moment, he breathed again. He couldn't know what building this was, but it was not deserted. At 2100 at night, all the windows were ablaze. He tried to stay back out of the light as he peered in. The window was an office, empty. He'd need something to wrap around his hand to break that window, but all he was wearing was a pair of shoe socks and a prison jumper. Well, he could be more conspicuous than he was now. He took off the jumper, wiped a part of it around his hand, and struck. He almost broke his hand. Well, they'd let him keep his jewelry, his wristwatch, and diamond ring. He drew a circle on the glass with the ring, pushing down hard, and struck again with the other hand. It had to be glass. If it was plastic, he was doomed. The glass popped out in a near perfect circle. He had to do it 6 times, but the hole was big enough for him. He smiled as he stepped inside, still holding his jumper. Now all he needed was an elevator. The cops could have picked him up in an instant if they'd caught him on the street in a prison jumper. But if he hit the jumper, he'd be safe. Who would suspect a licensed nudist? Except that he didn't have a license, or a nudist shoulder pouch to put it in, or a shave. That was very bad. Never had there been a nudist as hairy as this. Not just a 5 o'clock shadow, but a full beard all over. Where could he get a razor? He tried the desk drawers. Many businessmen kept spare razors. He stopped when he was halfway through. Not because he'd found a razor, but because he now knew where he was. The papers on his desk made it all too obvious. A hospital. He was still clutching the jumper. He dropped it in the wastebasket, covered it tightly with papers, and more or less collapsed into the chair behind the desk. A hospital. He would pick a hospital. And this hospital, the one which had been built right next to the Topeka County Courthouse, for good and sufficient reason. But he hadn't picked it, not really. It had picked him. Had he ever in his life made a decision except on the prompting of others? No. Friends had borrowed his money for keeps. Men had stolen his girls. He had avoided promotion by his lack for not being ignored. Shirley had bullied him into marrying her, then left him 4 years later for a friend who wouldn't be bullied. Even now, at the possible end of his life, it was the same. An aging body snatcher had given him escape. An engineer had built the cell walls wide enough to let a small man squeeze between them. Another had put a pet walk along two convenient roofs, and here he was. The worst of it was that here he had no chance of masquerading as a nudist. Hospital gowns and masks would be the minimum. Even nudists had to wear clothing sometime. The closet. There was nothing in the closet but a spiffy green hat and a perfectly transparent rain poncho. He could run for it. If he could find a razor, he'd be safe once he reached the street. He bit at a knuckle, wishing he knew where the elevator was. Had to trust his luck. He began searching the drawers again. He had his hand on a black red leather razor case when the door opened. A beefy man in a hospital gown breezed in. The intern, there were no human doctors in hospitals, was halfway to the desk before he noticed Liu crouching over an open drawer. He stopped walking. His mouth fell open. Liu closed it with the fist which had grasped the razor case. The man's teeth came together with a sharp click. His knees were buckling as Liu passed past him and out the door. The elevator was just down the hall, with the doors standing open, and nobody coming. Liu jumped in and pressed O. He shaved as the elevator dropped. The razor cut fast and close, if a trifle noisily. He was working on his chest as the door opened. A skinny technician stood directly in front of him, her mouth and eyes set in the utterly blank expression of those who wait for elevators. She brushed past him with a muttered apology, hardly noticing him. Liu stepped out fast. The doors were closing before he realized that he was on the wrong floor. That damn tech! She had stopped the elevator before it reached bottom. He turned and stabbed the down button. Then, what he'd seen in one cursory glance came back to him, and his head whipped around for another look. The whole vast room was filled with glass tanks, ceiling height, arranged in a labyrinth like the bookcases in a library. In the tanks was a display more lewd than anything in Belsen. Why, those things had been men and women. No, he wouldn't look. He refused to look at anything but the elevator door. What was taking that elevator so long? He heard a siren. The hard tiled floor began to vibrate against his bare feet. He felt a numbness in his muscles, a lethargy in his soul. The elevator arrived too late. He blocked the doors open with a chair. Most buildings didn't have stairs, only alternate elevators. They'd have to use the alternate elevator to reach him now. Well, where was it? He wouldn't have time to find it. He was beginning to feel really sleepy. They must have several sonic projectors focused on this one room. When one beam passed, the entrance would feel mildly relaxed, a little clumsy. But when the beams intersected, here, there would be unconsciousness. But not yet. He had something to do first. By the time they broke in, they'd have something to kill him for. The tanks were faced in plastic, not glass, a very special kind of plastic. To avoid provoking defense reactions in all the myriads of body parts which may be stored touching it, the plastic had to have unique characteristics. No engineer could have been expected to make it shatterproof too. It shattered very satisfactorily. Later, Liu wondered how he managed to stay up as long as he did. The soothing hypersonic murmur of the stun beams kept pulling him down to a floor which seemed softer every moment. The chair he wielded became heavier and heavier, but as long as he could lift it, he smashed. He was knee-deep in nutritive storage fluid, and there were dying things brushing against his ankles with every move. But his work was barely a third done when the silent song became too much for him. He fell. And after all that, they never even mentioned the smashed organ banks. Sitting in a courtroom, listening to the drone of courtroom ritual, Liu sought out Mr. Broxton's ear to ask the question. Mr. Broxton smiled at him. Why should they want to bring that up? They think they've got enough on you as it is. If you beat the rap, then they'll persecute you for wanton destruction of valuable medical sources. But they're sure you won't. But you? I'm afraid they're right, but we'll try. Now Hennessy is about to read the charges. Can you manage to look hurt and indignant? Sure. Good. The prosecution led the charges, his voice sounding like the voice of doom coming from under a thick blonde moustache. Warren Lewis Knowles looked hurt and indignant, but he no longer felt that way. He had done something worth dying for. The cause of it all was the organ banks. With good doctors and a sufficient flow of materials in the organ bank, any taxpayer could hope to live indefinitely. What voter would vote against eternal life? The death penalty was his immortality, and he would vote the death penalty for any crime at all. Lewis Knowles had struck back. The state will prove that the said Warren Lewis Knowles did, in the space of 2 years, willfully drive through a total of 6 red traffic lights. During that same period, the same Warren Knowles exceeded local speed limits no less than 10 times, once by as much as 15 miles per hour. His record has never been good. We will produce records of his arrest in 2082 on a charge of drunk driving, a charge of which he was acquitted only through objection sustained. If he was acquitted, Counselor, the court must assume him not guilty. And so that was The Jigsaw Man by Larry Niven. And the book that I found this in, Dangerous Visions, came to me quite by chance when I was browsing a second-hand bookstore in an area called Gold Park in Kolkata. Now, as I understand it, this ushered in an era of stories in science fiction, which is known as the New Wave. And so, over the course of this month, I will be focusing on science fiction stories, both classical, New Wave, and everything in between. And I hope I will have your company on this journey. And I hope that we will be going to infinity and beyond. Live long and prosper, because survival is insufficient. And I'll see you next time on A House Full of Stories.